Thank you. Good evening, good afternoon. And Dean Wilson was up at my house a couple of months ago. He was looking for some pictures, and he asked me if I would come and talk about my family and especially the history of Arnold Motor Company here in Dayton, Tennessee. And before I could make up an excuse, honestly, my wife answered, "He'll do it." So I'm here now. So you see who won. So, but it's good to be with you today. I thank the members of the Historical Society for inviting us to share our family history with you today. And before I get started into my family history and the history of Arnold Motor Company, I'd like to take you down memory lane a little bit back in the 50s, because that's when I grew up in Dayton. I'm a native of Dayton. I've lived here all my life, with the exception of 2 years in the military service. So I grew up in the 50s, and I'd like to just go through town. This town was different back then. It was you didn't have the bypass out here, so this was the main thoroughfare through Market Street. And if you start up at the north end of town there, we had, I counted 7 service stations, or back then we used to call them filling stations. And so nowadays you go to a convenience store to fill up your tanks. But I counted 10 here just in the small area of Dayton, 10 service stations. And the first one I'd like to recognize is Hayes Brewer's station up on 7th Avenue, 7th and Market up here. We lived in a house right behind his service station there. He sold Sinclair gasoline. And then if you move back down south on Market Street here, you come to the Esso station right over here on the corner. It was owned by Garrison's Esso. And the funny thing about that is I used to stand and watch people come. They would come into the service station for service. Back then you got full service. You know, they checked everything. And they would have 3 or 4 guys sitting on these Coca-Cola cases, the wooden Coca-Cola cases. They'd be sitting out front there. They'd wait on cars to come in, and before they could get stopped, they would be out there. It reminded you of the pit stops that you see at the NASCAR races now. I mean, they were on it. And so I used to stand across the street there and watch them. You know, one guy would open the hood, check everything under the hood. Another guy he was in charge of the windshield, cleaning the windshield. Another guy would check all the tires. And so, you know, they gave you full service back then. You don't get that today. And then just directly, horizontally across the street there was the airline station. That was the Gulf station, and it had many owners over the years. But I think back in the 50s, Kay Jones owned it for a while. I remember him on it. And so that was a pretty popular place. It was right here on the corner of the Market and 3rd Avenue. Then if you move on down the street there was another Gulf station down on Market and Main on the left-hand side of the street there. And it was on, I don't know when he purchased it, but I do remember Donald Joe Nichols owning that Gulf station down there. And then just a few feet down the street there was Dyer's Esso. And then if you moved on down the street, Arnold Motor Company had a service station at that time. And they sold Sinclair gasoline. The main reason they sold Sinclair gasoline was my father's brother, Ed Arnold. He was the Sinclair distributor here in Dayton. He owned that business for many years, and then he later sold out to J.C. Young. And so if you move on down south, on the right-hand side there, it's down where the, close to where the Middle Tennessee Natural Gas Company is now. Dean Corbin had a Texaco station there. And then on the opposite side of the street there, a little further down, as you turn in to go to the Dayton City School, there was a Power 99 station there. And one thing I remember about that, back when I was young, we were playing baseball down at the Dayton City School Park one day, and I was out in the outfield, and I kept noticing these cars lining up there, on the street. There was a big line of cars, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. I said, I know they're not coming to see us one. So I asked somebody, and they said, oh, there's a gas war in town. And so back then, that was popular enough, of course, to have gas wars. And they were selling gasoline for 9 cents a gallon at the Power 99. And so all these people were lining up to fill the tanks up. And then you had also, on the opposite side of the street there, as you go into Dayton City School, there was a Shell station. And just a little further down Market Street there, further south, Mr. Owens had a Sinclair station there. So, quite a few service stations or filling stations in Dayton at that time, back in the 1950s. And that was something that stood out to me, that a small town like Dayton could have that many service stations just in one area. And then another thing was back in the 50s, we had 6 new car dealerships in Dayton. 6. I think today we have 1, Dayton Ford. So those 6, as I remember them, Earl Garrison, right over here on the corner, right across the street there, he had the Pontiac dealership. He also sold international trucks and farm-out tractor equipment. And then Buddy Gurley had the Oldsmobile dealership, and it was down on Main Street, down on Main and Martin. And Charlie Walters had the Buick dealership, and it was down on Market Street as you turn in to go to Dayton City School. It was on going south. It was on the right-hand side of it, right there on the corner. He had the Buick. Truman Cox had the Dodge dealership. And it was right across the street here on 2nd Avenue. He later moved down on Market Street. That was in the late 50s. But he started out on 2nd Avenue here. And Whitney Brown had Brown Chevrolet. He had taken over for his father, Mr. Jack Brown. And Mr. Jack Brown was dear friend of my father. He helped him quite a bit when he got started in business. So they were good friends. Whitney had the Chevrolet dealership, and then my father had the Arnold Motor Company Ford dealership. It was on Market Street, down there where the fire department and police department were. And then there's a few places in town that I can recall. We had two drugstores in town, what I call full-service drugstores. In fact, that they had the old-time soda fountains. And Ann is here. Her family had Robinson Drugstore just right across the way there on Market and 2nd Avenue there. That was Robinson Drugstore. Their motto was hustling drugs. And you could always go in there and the soda fountain, you can buy the chocolate sodas there with the tall glasses in there. And they were delicious. I can still taste those things. And they also had such drinks there at the fountain as orange eggs and cherry smash. They had that one, and limeades. It was just a good place to visit. Had real good sandwiches in there. I believe Miss Butler made the sandwiches every morning fresh. Brought them in down there. So I remember the egg salad sandwiches, best I've ever tasted. And then down a couple of blocks on down, you had Rogers Drugstore. They too had a full-service fountain there, you know. Dickie Rogers and his father had that. And then there's one place in particular that, I don't know, I think about it many times as I'm thinking about over the years of living in Dayton. And it's the ice plant over here by the railroad track, just right across the way. And Mr. Shield on the ice plant. And it's ironic that they sold ice there by the blocks of ice, and they sold it to people that back then a lot of people didn't have electric refrigerators, and they used the block ice to cool their refrigerator. And then on the other hand, they also sold coal to heat your home. So they had ice and coal. So big contrast. And but the thing I remember about the ice plant is on a hot summer afternoon, a lot of us kids would ride our bicycles down to the ice plant there, and we'd get fudgesicles. They made the best fudgesicles that you've ever wanted to taste. And they were simple. All it was water and powdered chocolate, you know, and mixed together. But the way he made them, and he froze them up there, we would go up there, and Mr. Shield would come out on the porch there, and he'd say, "Boys, I'll have some ready in about 30 minutes." I said, "They'll be frozen in about 30 minutes." So we'd sit out there on the porch and watch them bring the ice out to the cars or the trucks with these big tongs. You know, it didn't take much to satisfy us, you know, on hot summer afternoon. Those fudgesicles, they're one thing that I really remember. But we had, you know, everything was centered in town. Like I say, you didn't have the bypass. The bypass wasn't completed until sometime around 1958, 1959. So everything was in the center of town here. You had grocery stores here, clothing stores, NQ Purser, Burton Knight, those people had dry goods stores right here in town. Taxi cabs, had 2 or 3 taxi cab services. Stumpy Rhea had a taxi cab. And so those are some of the things that I remember about living in Dayton. Certainly the traffic wasn't as heavy as it is today. And it was just an enjoyable time and a great town to live in. And so I'm going to move on and get into my family history here. Of course, my name is George Clark Arnold, and that'll come into play as I get into the history of Arnold Motor Company. But I'm married to Rebecca Welch Arnold, and we were married June 2nd, 1968, over here, just a block or so away at the First Baptist Church, at the old church. The church with the huge columns, the white columns, before it burned. We were married in June of 1968, and the church burned in October of 1970. So I think we were one of the last weddings to be held there, and I hope that's not the reason the church burned. We've lived in Dayton all our life, with the exception of 2 years in military service. We lived in California, and we have 2 children. Krista Arnold Ray, she was born in October 1970. She was born in Van Nuys, California. It's in the San Fernando Valley, so she is a true Valley girl. She was born in San Fernando Valley. And she is married to Rusty Ray. They both teach in the Ray County school system. And they have 3 sons, which are, of course, our grandsons. And Weston, I think he's here today. And he's 24, and a senior at University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. And Kale, I don't know, is Kale here? Kale's here. Yeah, Kale. Okay, Kale works for Todd Curry Heating and Air. He's a technician for Todd. And Keaton, age 20, is a sophomore at Walker State Community College in Morristown. And as we speak, he's on the baseball team, and they're playing baseball as we speak now. So that's where he is. And Rusty's up there watching. And then we have a son, Clay. Clay is single. He's never been married. He lives in Nashville, and he's in graphic design work as an artist. And he also has a couple of other jobs that bring in a few dollars. He'll pay the bills. Ubers, yeah. So he lives in Nashville, and he enjoys it over there. But getting into the history of my family, I'm going to start. I'm not going to go back too far, but I'll start with my grandparents. My great grandfather was named Samuel Benjamin Arnold, and he was a farmer. He fought in the Civil War for the Confederate Army. Now, my great-grandfather on my mother's side of the family, Thomas Jefferson Knight, fought for the Union Army. And he left Dayton to join the Union Army. The Confederates caught him going into across the line there into Kentucky, and they put him in jail. He escaped from jail and went on up further north to Somerset, Kentucky, where he joined the Union Army and fought for the Union Army in the Civil War. He was married to Mary Burton Arnold, and she was a Cherokee Indian, full-blooded Cherokee Indian. And then my grandfather was William Henry Arnold. He was born in Ray County in 1857, and he died in 1939. He was a farmer, married. He had a farm. The farm was actually over there on the lake, where the lake is now, where the boat dock is. And at the time, that was all farmland. TBA, when they built the dam up there, they flooded a lot of the area here in Ray County, and that took their farm. It's now a lake over there, as you can see. And so that's where he farmed. He also owned the land, the hill over there next to it there. He owned that land, and of course now it's known as the Edgewater subdivision. And he was married to Ellen Johns Arnold, and she was born in Rogers Creek, which is over right on the Minn and Meigs County line there, on Highway 30 there going toward Athens. And the thing about it is Ellen John's mother, which would be my great-grandmother, her mother, Hannah, she was a Creek Indian. And so I've got a lot of Indian in me. And so I thought that was something that I needed to bring up. And William Henry, they called him Bill. He went by Bill. And Ellen Johns Arnold, they had 13 children in their family from 1886 to 1909. And the ninth child in that family was General Garland. He was born in 1902. And that was my father. And you say, now wait a minute, your father was Birch Arnold. He was born as General Garland Arnold. His mother evidently liked military military officers or something like that, because he had an older brother, and his name was Colonel. They called him Chuck. But my father's given name at birth was General Garland. And sometime around, he was born in 1902, so sometime around 1920, in his late teen years, he went to court and had his name changed. And it was quite an ordeal. Clyde Roddy told me about this. Clyde is a friend of the family. He knew my father for many years. They grew up together, and so he knew a lot about the family, and that's where a lot of this information that I'm giving you today comes from. It comes from Clyde, and it comes also from my brother Jack. I came in on the scene late, so I'm giving you a lot of this information secondhand. But he did go to court, and Clyde said it was quite an ordeal, and said he had to go 2 or 3 days there to convince the judge that he needed to change his name. Now, he changed his name to Birch, and I don't know the story behind it. I don't know why he chose that name. You know, you would think he would take Bill or Tom or some common name, but he chose Birch, and I don't know to this day why he chose that name. But one thing about him, he always dressed in a suit, a tie, and a white dress shirt. You always saw him in that dress. He never he didn't have blue jeans or anything, and so that was always his attire. Even at home when he's sitting there watching TV, he'd have that suit, the tie, and that white dress shirt on. And Dean wanted me to give you some information on what he did for a living. My father only went to the 8th grade, and of course, that was fairly common back then, because when they got old enough to work on the farm, they just quit school and started working. That's what he did. He worked on his father's farm over here for several years, and then when he got old enough to get a job, he went into he was the cook for a while. He cooked at several restaurants around here, and then he got into he liked automobiles, and he got into selling vehicles, and that's what he ended up doing the rest of his life. He sold vehicles, but well, I'm going to go through and give you the rest of the history on him. He married my mother. She was Ruth Heyman Knight, and he married her sometime in 1922. I don't know the exact date, but my mother told him that she came from a family of 10 children, and he came from a family of 13. And she told him before they got married that she didn't want to have a large family. Well, they ended up having 7 children. So that didn't go over too well. But they had 7 children. The oldest was Marjorie Dean, and she was born in 1924. And she married Martell Gamble. Martell worked for my father for several years, and then he later started his own business in Spring City, Tennessee, as the Lincoln Mercury dealer up there. The next born was Margaret Ellen. She was born in 1926. She married Bill Harwood. For a few years there, Bill worked for my dad as a business manager at Arnold Motor Company. And then in 1952, they decided to move to Dayton Beach, Florida, where they went into the motel business. And then my brother Jack was born in 1929. He was actually born in Saudi Daisy, because my father was working in Chattanooga as an auto salesman at that time, and they had moved to Saudi Daisy. So he was born in Slave Daisy, and he was married to Joanne Gibbons. And she was originally from, I believe, Mayfield, Kentucky. And then next in line was Rhea Faye. She was born in 1936. And she married George Arnold. And then there was Gay Nell. She was born in 1939. She married Frank Wells. And then Marilyn, she's still living. She was born in 1942, and she married Jerry Brown of Athens. Marilyn still lives in Athens, Tennessee. And then finally, I came along in 1946. I was the only one of 7 children to be born in the hospital. The rest were born at home. And I was born a couple of blocks down the street, W.A. Thomason Hospital. Dr. Agnew delivered me. And so that's where I was born. Okay, I'm going to move on into the history of Arnold Motor Company here, and we're going to go back to the year was 1935, and my father was working at Mr. Summers' Chevrolet dealership in Chattanooga. He had worked there for several years, and just so happened that a representative from the Ford Motor Company knew Mr. Summers, and he came by to see him one day, and he asked him, he said, we're going to establish a Ford dealership in Dayton, Tennessee. He said, would you have anybody in mind that you would recommend that we talk to, about this opportunity? And Mr. Summers said, yes, matter of fact, I do. He said, I've got a salesman that's been with me for several years. He said, he's my best salesman. He said, he's got a good, sound business mind, and I think he would be a good candidate for who you're looking for. And so Mr. Summers called my dad into the office there, introduced me to the Ford rep, and they talked for quite a while, and finally it got down to money, financial situation. And my dad asked him, just give me a ballpark figure of what I'm going to need to get into to this business, to buy the franchise. So the Ford dealer talked to him there, and he gave him a figure, It was pretty substantial. And my father said, well, he said, I just don't have that kind of money. He said, I don't have the money to get into the business. He said, let me make one phone call, and I'll see what I can do. So he was acquainted with Mr. George Clark. He was chairman of the board, founder of Pioneer Bank in Chattanooga. And I don't know how they got acquainted, but he was very good friends with him. And he called Mr. Clark on the phone and told him the situation. And he wanted to know if he could borrow the money to get into business. And Mr. Clark said, by all means. He said, I think it's a great opportunity for you. He said, whatever you need, I'll supply the money. So my dad was all enthused and all, and Mr. Clark said, let me talk to the Ford rep. And so the Ford rep talked to Mr. Clark, and they worked out a few details over the phone. He assured him that the the money would be there, and the finances would be taken care of. And so we got off the phone with Mr. Clark, the board rep, turned to my father and said, congratulations, said you've just become the first Ford dealer in Dayton, Tennessee. So that's how his business started. And so my father slowly started building the business up. He had a parts department. He had a full service department down there. He had at least 4 mechanics working at one time. And he added a gas station there, so Sinclair Gas. And he also had well, this was after the war, but he was able to obtain one of these Quonset huts. It's a metal building. It's funnel shaped, and the Army had used them in the war, and there was a surplus of them, and they were just giving them away, to anybody that was interested in them. And so he was able to get one of those, and they brought it in and assembled it there, and they made a body shop out of it. So he started a body shop, and I remember 2 people that started out working there for my dad, Shorty Bowles and Luke Bishop, and they later went out and started their own body shop business on their own. And they were 2 of the best in Dayton in that kind of work. So he also had a business across the street, directly across the street from Arnold Motor Company. It was Arnold Tractor Company, and there he sold Ford tractors and Ford farm equipment. And he did great after he started business. Had it built up, and then World War II came, 1941, and of course everything slowed down at that point. Everybody, suffered. Businesses suffered, and he was somehow able to keep his employees working and gave them a job and made it through the war. And after, in the post-war era, business had begun to pick up. People were returning from the war. They had money, mustering out pay or something like that, and they had jobs to return to, and they could buy homes on the GI Bill, and of course, they needed transportation, and so it was a big boom for not only the automobile business, but for business in general, just after the war. And there's a story that goes along with this. In 1946, there was a Chattanooga dealer, Ford dealer there, I believe it was Furlow Cake. They had ordered and received by rail about 75 Ford cars. And the cars arrived down there at the rail yard there in Chattanooga, and his financing had fallen through, and he couldn't get the cars. Ford wouldn't let him have the cars because he didn't have the finance. And so those cars were sitting there on the rail yard, railway, and it was costing Ford Motor Company money for them to sit there. So they were putting pressure on the Ford district manager, to find somebody to take the cars. And at that time, cars were they were hard to come by because they hadn't made that many. The factories were just beginning to retool from the war, and they began to hire employees back and retrain them. So it was hard to get vehicles back in that day. But somehow this Ford dealer had ordered 75 new cars. And so the first person that the district rep called was my father. And he asked him if he could help him out, take some of the cars that were on the rail yard down there. And my father said, let me make a phone call and I'll tell you how many I can get. So once again, he went to the well. The well being Mr. George Clark at Pioneer Bank. He called him and he told him that, all these cars, these Ford vehicles were down in Chattanooga, and he had a chance to buy them. And he was wanting to know how many he could get, how many that Mr. Clark would finance. Mr. Clark said, well, just get them all. He said, you can sell them. He said, just get all back. Said, I'm good for it. He said, I'll finance them. And so that's what happened. He got the cars, but they had, the big problem was they had to get the cars up to date. And I know my brother Jack said he went down there for several days, and he could, back then it was a 2-lane road to Chattanooga, and back then it was, the best you could do was probably 3 trips a day. And it took several days to get all those cars back to Dayton from Chattanooga. And they filled the lot up down at Arnold Motor Company. They didn't have any room for them. And they used the old Graceful hosiery mill down here on the Main Street. It was empty at the time. They put cars in there. My dad had purchased a farm out on Cockport Road. And they took cars out there, and they parked them several different, they had them all over town. And they got them, they said, well, we've got these cars now. I said, we got to get rid of them, we got to sell them. So they put out flyers, they advertised heavily all over the area. And evidently advertising work, because Clyde Roddy told me this. He said on one Saturday, they sold over 55 new cars. And I told him, I said, Clyde, that's unreasonable. I said, for Dayton, or a small town like Dayton in 1946? He said, yeah, we sold over 55 new vehicles in one day. He said we had people coming from Chattanooga, Athens, Cleveland, all around the area coming in. He said we were down there after 10 o'clock on Saturday night selling cars. Of course, back then, there wasn't the paperwork that you go through nowadays. You didn't even have to have insurance back in those days. It was available, but you didn't have to have it. So it was a lot easier to sell a car back in those days, but I thought that was incredible that they could sell that many cars in one day. And so they got the cars in, and Jack was just got his driver's license, and he was wanting a convertible. Convertibles they were just hard to come by. I mean, they didn't make very many of them Schultz, any of these cars out here? He said, whatever you want. He said, no, I'm going to hold out for a convertible. I want a convertible. He was wanting a convertible. And so my dad had told the district rep there for Ford, same guy that he talked to, he got the 75 cars from, said, if you ever come across a convertible, let me know. And so, just so happened that the district rep called him one day, and he said, Mr. Arnold said, I've got a convertible that's just come off the assembly line up here, and the guy that ordered the car has canceled the order. He said, I can hold it for you, but you've got to be here at the plant in Louisville, Kentucky tomorrow morning to pick up the car. I can't hold it any longer than that. Said there's people wanting it right now, so I'm going to hold it for you. If you can be here in the morning to pick it up. So my dad said, well, who can I get to go up there with me to bring it back? He said, Junior Tucker. Junior was he was the first cousin of Jack's and mine, and he's a good friend of Jack. He ran around with Jack. He called Junior, and he said, Junior said, pack your bags. Said, we're leaving here in a few minutes, and we're going to Louisville, Kentucky, and we're going to go pick up a convertible for Jack. Said, I don't want him to know anything about it. Said, I'm going to go up there and get it for him. And so Junior and my dad drove up there, and they got up there that night, and they were at the Ford plant in Louisville there the next morning to pick up the car. On the way back home, they stopped in Kentucky, some small town in Kentucky, to eat lunch. And while they were in there, a fellow walked in, and he said, who owns this red Ford convertible out here? My dad said, well, I do. He said, I'll give you $3,500 for it right now. And he said, I've got the cash. He said, I've been looking for a convertible. And so, I mean, the car was, it was probably $1,500 at the most, And my dad said, I'm not going to sell it. It's not for sale. He said, I promise my son I'd give him a convertible, and I'm going to take it on back home to him. So the guy said, okay. So my dad turned down probably $2,000 profit by turning down that deal. And so they got back home, and Jack got his convertible, took him around. But some other stories that I'd like to tell you right quick about automotive, things that happen at our automotive company, unusual things. There was a fellow that came in here from Georgia, Gordon Lee Smith, and he met my aunt, Eula, father's sister, and so they got married, and my father put him to work down at the motor company. He was working in the service department down there, and like I say, he was married to my Aunt Eula. People called her Oops. She had a twin sister, Beulah, and they called her Boots. So he had Oops and Boots. They were known throughout town. If you ever wanted to know what was going on in town, they knew it. But anyway, Gordon Lee worked there in the service department, and he went into the service, went into the war. He was involved in evidently heavy fighting during the war, and when he came back, he was real nervous, had shell shock, just he was just a nervous type person, you know. And so Gordon Lee wanted to be a salesman. So my dad said, well, I think he'd make a good one. So he made a salesman out of it. And this fella had ordered a car that had come in. And he'd come down and pick it up. And Gordon Lee was in the showroom there. He had his back turned. And Gordon Lee knew the fella knew Gordon Lee. And the guy came through the showroom there. And he just slapped Gordon Lee on the back. What do you say, Gordon Lee? And so Gordon Lee, without hesitation, he just turned around and he clocked him. The guy hit the floor and knocked him out. And they had to revive him, you know. They got him to come to and make sure he was all right. Gordon Lee apologized, you know, for hitting the guy. And he signed his paperwork, got his new car, and everything was fine. You know. Word got around town that don't go to Arnold Motor Company and try to buy a vehicle, so they'll beat you up. They'll beat you up physically and in your pocket. So, one more story about Gordon Lee. Like I say, he was a salesman down there, and this big burly fella came in one day. He was probably a biscuit or two shy of 300 pounds, you know. He came on the lot down there, and he was looking at the cars. Gordon Lee was waiting on him, you know, showing him the car, and the guy kept saying things about the Ford, you know, comparing it to the Chevrolet. You know. Well, Chevrolet's got this. Ford doesn't have this. He said, I don't like this. And it was kind of making Gordon Lee mad. You know, he was getting mad about a minute. And so finally, the guy figured out that he had it where he needed it. He said, I tell you what, he said, this car's so light, said, I can pick up the front end of it. And Gordon Lee said, why you can't do that? He said, that car's too heavy. You can't pick up the front end of that. The guy said, I'll bet you $50 that I can pick up the front end of this car. So Gordon Lee didn't have $50 on him. So he had to go in the office there and dope ball $50 out of the cash register. And of course, he had to pay it back when he got his paycheck. But anyway, Clyde Rodney was there on the lot, and he was standing there listening to him. Clyde sized up the guy. He said, he followed Gordon Lee in the office. He said, Gordon Lee, said, don't do that. He said, don't bet on another guy's trick. He said, he's a con man. He said, don't do that. Gordon Lee said, yeah, I'm going to make $50. He said, he can't pick that car up. So Gordon Lee went running back out there. That guy, he squatted down, you know, got a hold of the bumper, front bumper, raised that car up. He told Gordon Lee that. He said, spin those front wheels for me. So Gordon Lee handed him $50. And Clyde stood over there and just shook his head. He said, I knew that was going to happen. But another thing that happened, as I mentioned, Mr. George Clark was good friends with my father, and he found out it was my 12th birthday. This was in 1958. It was in August 1958. And he called my dad and he said, I want to do something special for Master George. They called him Master. He said, I want to do something special for Master George's 12th birthday. He said, I want to bring my yacht up and take a group of his friends out for a cruise on his 12th birthday. And my dad said, well, okay, that'd be fine. I said, we'll get a group of his friends together, and said, we'll have them there, you know. So the morning of my birthday there, I was outside, and I turned around. We lived over on the lake there by the boat dock, and I looked up the lake there, and I saw this huge yacht coming down the lake. I mean, I'd never seen anything that big in my life. And so they got it. They couldn't get it on there at the boat dock. They couldn't get it in the boat dock because the water was too shallow. They had to keep it in the channel out there, and the channel wasn't very wide. So they had to turn this yacht around, and they just had to wiggle their way around, and it probably took an hour and a half to turn that boat around. I don't know how many gallons of gasoline it took, but they used a lot of gasoline just turning the vessel around so they could get it heading back out. And anyway, I got a friend that took us on a cruise. Mr. Clark had his own captain boat. That's the only job he had. Was captain. This boat was ocean work. It went up. He took it on some voyages across the ocean. So I think they said it had 12 bedrooms. It had its own galley, its own captain, and so it was a very, very large vessel. And so he took us down the river there on the cruise. Catered lunch for us, had his own shelf there on the boat there. Fed us lunch, and we came back in, and they got all the kids off the boat. And later on that night, the adults had a party on that boat, and I think it lasted all night long. But that was a pretty good deal. It caused quite a stir in town. People were going over the boat dock there just so they could see the big canoe there in the channel. Then in 1958, my dad sold Fords throughout the 50s, and in 1958, the Ford Motor Company, they had started increasing their demands on dealers to meet monthly quotas and all. And my father again started thinking about retirement, and he sold out in either 1958 or 1959. He sold the dealership to Charlie Walters. Now, it could have had something to do with the Edsel. Ford came out with the Edsel, and that was one of the worst mistakes in business history. So that may have been part of the problem there. But he sold the dealership to Charlie Walters in 1958, and he still kept the Arnold tractor business across the street, and kept that for a couple of years. And then in 1961, Chrysler Corporation came calling, and they asked him if he would take the Chrysler Plymouth dealership in Dayton. And my dad had a good friend, Truman Cox, who had the Dodge dealership. They were best friends. He said, well, I don't want to fridge on my my friend, I'm going to talk to Truman and see what he thinks. So he went to Truman and he asked him, he said, Truman, do you want the Chrysler Plymouth dealership along with Dodge? Truman said, no. I said, Bert, I'm thinking about retiring himself anyway. Said, you take it. It won't bother me. So my father went back into the car dealership business in 1961, selling Chrysler Plymouths. And he sold Fords for 22 years and built up a good relationship with a lot of people here in town. And they would come down there and look at the Chrysler Plymouths. And my dad was telling me, he said that'd be the best car you've ever driven. And they kept telling me, well, Mr. Arnold said, you told us for 22 years that Ford was the best car made. He said, well, just drive the car. Said it'll sell itself. Said, you'll see for yourself that this is a good car. And so he put a lot of Chrysler Plymouths on the road here in Dayton during 1961. Then back in 1959, my dad decided he would get into politics, and his friend Jim Abel talked him into running for the city council here in Dayton. And he said, we'll run on the same ticket. Well, my father was a big Republican and Jim was a Democrat. So, they didn't know how that would go, but they ran on the same ticket. They ran together for the city council, and both of them were elected in 1959. And then in 1965, they had to run again for council. The seat was up, and they ran in 1965, and they were defeated. It was a literally fought election, and that's about all I'll say. That they lost. Close election. And so in 1964, my dad started to think about retirement again, and he had talked to my sister, Gaynell, and her husband, Frank Welch. They were living in Chattanooga at the time, and Frank was in the finance business, and he talked Frank into coming up and working at Arnold Motor Company, and he started grooming Frank to take over the business operation of Arnold Motor Company when he retired. And so it was just after the election. The election in 1965 was in November, and on the morning of January 10th, 1966, my dad got up and went to work as he normally did, and about 9 o'clock in the morning he started feeling bad, and told those in the office there at Arnold Motor Company he was going to go home for a while. He wasn't feeling good, and he drove himself home. He made it home, thankfully, and so he got home, and he died of a heart attack there at home. But there's something about that day that I still remember. I know that my dad never would have enjoyed retirement. He liked work. He worked all his life. And I remember that he died with his work clothes on. And that was a suit, a tie, a white dress shirt. So you know, I was thankful for that. And so after that, after my dad died, my sister Gay and Frank took over the operation of the dealership, and they did a great job of managing the dealership, keeping it open, keeping the doors open. And I'm forever grateful they took care of my mother and myself financially. I was a sophomore at Bryan College at the time, and they helped put me through school, and they helped my mother also financially, and so I'm grateful to them that they looked after us. One other story I want to give you. This was in probably 1967, 68. Frank had hired Hurley Marsh and Rick Price. They came to Frank. They wanted to be car salesmen. They were young guys, and so they decided they wanted to be car salesmen. So Frank went out. Clyde Roddy was still working there at the garage as a salesman, and he asked Clyde if he'd take them under his wing, sort of teach them the ropes about the business, how to sell cars. So Clyde said, "Yeah, I'll do it." So Rick got uptown. He decided that they needed a radio there in the sales office, and he says, "Two dull in here." I said, "We need a radio. We need some music." So he'd gone uptown here and bought a transistor radio about that size. He'd take it down there and put it in the sales office, and he had that thing turned up loud. It was playing rock and roll music. I believe it was Jet Fly, Tommy Jet music back then. And so Clyde was sitting in there one day, and he was sitting in a chair, smoking cigarettes, and Rick and Hurley were in there. And I was working down there in my office. I came out there and talked to him, I was sitting in there, and I could, of course, I knew that loud music was getting on Clyde's nerves. He was sitting there. I could see his teeth grinding. And so I said, I'm going to hang around. I said, something's going to go down. And so Clyde sat there for a while. I could see the wheels turning. He's thinking, I've got to get rid of that radio. I've got to do it diplomatically. So he finished his cigarette, and he said, "Rick, how much would you take for half interest in that radio?" Rick said, "I don't know." Said, "I bought it uptown there." Said, "I gave $20-something for it." He said, "I guess $10, be half interest." Clyde said, "Okay, fine." So Clyde got up out of his chair, got his billfold, got a $10 bill out, went over there and handed it to Rick. And went back over to the radio, picked it up off the desk there, and he went, wham! And that thing busted to pieces. He still had half of it in his hand there, that hadn't busted. But he busted that on the corner of the desk, went over there and said, "Here, Rick, here's your half." But
Yeah, Arnold Motor existed, it actually existed until 1982, 83. My sister Jay passed away in 1978, and Frank carried on the business there for a few years after that, and then finally closed its doors, I believe, in 1983. So over the years, Arnold Motor Company was actually associated with all three of the big three auto manufacturers, Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors. Frank later picked up the GMC truck dealership and sold that. So that's about all I've got. I know I've gone way over time. Quite frankly, I purposely left out the Dayton Theater when I was going through reminiscing about downtown Dayton, and she's going to come and talk to you about the old Dayton Theater.